911.
Yes, I have an emergency.
Okay.
I think I have somebody dead.
The most grisly, nightmarish scene you could imagine.
Who is it?
The Dermans. I just came to check on them. They've been missing for about 4 days.
Two people that had no known enemies. It just didn't make any sense.
Oh, my God.
They're both dead?
Did you find both of them?
No.
No, it's just one. I don't know where the other one is.
Somewhere, somebody knows what happened.
Have you heard?
88-year-old Russell Dermond was found murdered in the garage of his home. His 87-year-old wife, Shirley, is nowhere to be found.
Mr. Dermond's head was decapitated. We do not know the whereabouts of his head.
Just 80 miles east of Atlanta, Georgia, sits Lake Oconee, home to 88-year-old Russell Dermond and his wife, 87-year-old Shirley Dermond, proud parents of 3 and grandparents to 9.
Lake Oconee is a very popular recreation destination in and of itself. But the homes there, particularly like in Great Waters where this took place, these are quiet homes. They're very expensive homes. They're multi-million-dollar homes.
Some of the finest golf courses in the southeast are in Reynolds. Very upscale, private community. I'm Howard Sills. I'm the sheriff of Putnam County. As you can see, it's a picturesque, idyllic neighborhood. Before this, we virtually had no crime. None. That's it, right there.
That's the garage.
That's the garage. Mr. Dermond's body was found inside there, and as you can see, there's nothing else around it.
I'm Brad Dermond. My parents were Russell and Shirley Dermond. They met in college, love at first sight, didn't date anybody else once the two of them had met.
Russell was a World War II veteran. Shirley was a stay-at-home mother and homemaker.
Worked corporate life. Later in his career, in his 50s, he made a very big change in his path and decided to become a franchisee of Hardee's in Atlanta.
He sold a couple of those, retired, built this house, moved down here. They'd been retired here for well over a decade.
They were married for 68 years, a very solid marriage, and it also gave a very solid base for their children. And as demonstrated by the marriages that their kids have had as well.
They had a number of grandchildren, the all-American grandma and grandpa.
There was a neighborhood party for the Kentucky Derby. It was Saturday night. The Dermonds were supposed to be there, but they didn't show up.
Their friends who were expecting them there, they noticed that they weren't there. They just assumed, well, maybe they changed their mind or something came up. A few more days went by and nobody had heard from them.
3 days after that, a few neighbors decided to go check out their home to see if they were okay. The door was unlocked. They walked in. One of the neighbors went into the garage.
Made this horrifying, grim discovery.
Oh.
Putnam County 911.
Yes, I have an emergency.
Okay.
I think I have somebody dead.
Who is it?
The Dermonds. I just came to check on them. They've been missing for about 4 days.
Are they in the house?
Yes, yes.
They don't find Mrs. Dermond, but in the garage, they discover Russell Dermond's body. He had been decapitated.
You had a pool of blood around his neck area.
Oh, my God. Oh.
They're both dead?
Did you find both of them?
No.
No, it's just one. I don't know where the other one is.
I actually was the second car on the scene. We rapidly cleared the house first looking for someone, and then it was pretty obvious that no one had been there for some time. In 30 minutes, I was asking the FBI what anybody knew about these people. Not because of the home, not because they were wealthy, but because of the decapitation. That was so unusual.
They find Russell Derman's body kind of lodged in between their two cars. They were able to identify his body through fingerprints. They didn't know for sure it was him.
I had to get his fingerprints from the U.S. Navy from World War II. Obviously, the first thing I looked for was the head. I thought it would be somewhere in the proximity of the body in the garage, and it wasn't. That certainly was unusual, something I'd never personally seen in a homicide case before.
There was some towels that the killer had apparently used to roll up and place around the exposed neck here so that the blood would not drain out underneath the garage door. Because the idea was to keep a passerby, if someone were to pull in the driveway, I guess they didn't want them to see blood coming out from underneath the garage door.
The body had been there for some time, but it was an air-conditioned garage. It wasn't decomposed like it would have been in a non-climate controlled area.
They could not find Shirley Derman. There was some thought maybe she was involved.
Mrs. Derman's purse was there, money was there, car was there, everything except Mrs. Derman was there. Although you don't suspect the 87-year-old of that type of crime, you can't eliminate that. Within 10 hours probably, I had Mrs. Derman's picture on every electronic billboard in the state of Georgia.
My brother-in-law called me. He couldn't communicate. So he put his son on the phone, and he did his best job.
They pretty quickly figured out that she was most likely kidnapped. They didn't know if she was alive or dead. They had little to work with because the house was pristine when they get in.
It looks entirely normal. It looks barely lived in. There's really nothing out of place. There's nothing that suggests that there was any kind of big struggle.
There would have been no signs of any kind of violence or any kind of break-in.
Within a couple of days, all of their children came. We had to have them go through to tell us, look, what's out of place here? What's missing?
Other than a lamp that was taken from inside the house and placed in the garage for lighting, the house was totally intact. Cash, Rolex watches, laptops, nothing was taken.
That doesn't look like any burglary or robbery I've ever seen.
It almost looked like it was staged by a real estate agent. Bed was not made up. There was some evidence that they had sat at some point in time at the kitchen table. But other than that, nothing in that home was out of place at all.
What was the motive here? Why these two people? Why this elderly couple who were retired, who had no known enemies, grandparents? They were as normal as you can get.
There's no thread of anything that makes any sense with any of this.
People loved having them around, but they were not individuals who sought a lot of attention to themselves. With the exception of the house that they owned, you would rarely know that they had much money. They were not ones to flaunt money around or pretentious in any form or fashion.
The totality of these circumstances are very unusual. If it's an abduction, you would expect some sort of extortion demand. If it was assassination, you would think both of the people would be there.
Law enforcement did what they always do. They try to recreate as much as they can a person's last days, things leading up to a homicide. In this particular case, they knew that Russell had gone grocery shopping.
That's him at his most happy moment. He'd go into Publix, getting himself out of the house, so that was totally business as usual for him.
Bought a loaf of bread and some cucumbers. Absolutely nothing of note at all. Window of when this occurred is sometime Friday morning until the time of the Kentucky Derby party. We know the Derby starts at 6:24, and obviously the party started before then, on Saturday. We know that the weekend edition of the USA Today had been delivered and was in the house. Now that's actually delivered on Friday, not Saturday.
Shirley had gotten the newspaper that day. She did crossword puzzles all the time.
There was communication between them and one of their children on Friday morning. He opened an email on his computer, so that's our window.
The very next day, we were interviewed by, obviously, Sheriff Sills and the FBI. Then we were taken to the house. I alone went into the garage. It would have been just the crime scene with my dad's body removed. That's it.
The autopsy determined that Russell Derman was not killed by the decapitation, that he was most likely killed before that.
We know that because there's a lack of arterial spurt. Here are the jugular veins and the arteries in your neck. If you sever one of those with the heart still pumping, then you're going to have arterial spurt, you're going to have blood being pumped out all over the room.
This was just in a pool, like it was just like water draining out of a bathtub. The blood was draining out of his body.
They don't know exactly what the cause of death was, but something had to happen in the cranial area that caused him to become deceased. Because there's no ligature marks like he's strangled.
Other than a laceration to one of Mr. Derman's index fingers, there was no trauma to his body at all.
The cut itself was right at the neckline. It didn't look like it was ragged. It was pretty clean. It was obvious that this was done with something that was a very sharp object. It may have been done by somebody with some experience. It certainly did not look like an amateur job.
Was it to send a message? Was it shock value? Was it to conceal evidence? All those things were bandied about.
Murder weapon has not been found.
Has not been.
If you start talking about a professional, possibly, that performed this decapitation, you use a machete. This is going to happen in one motion. The decapitation occurs instantaneously. In my opinion, this would be the tool that was used.
The investigation's moving slowly. There's really not many leads. They're still looking for Shirley Derman, and then 10 days later, they find something that shocks everyone.
Let's face it, any story that has beheading and kidnapping in the same headline really doesn't need a whole lot more to be both frightening and fascinating to a lot of people. But this story actually does have another level of intrigue. It's where it took place, here at Great Waters. And if you look down the road, you'll see that it's a gated community. In other words, not everybody gets in. That includes us. And it has its own private security force. But the neighborhood does have a back entrance. A really big one. And here it is, all 1,900 plus acres of it. They call it Lake Oconee.
This was so out of character for anywhere really, but certainly for Lake Oconee.
People scared?
Yes.
There was a wide search for Shirley. There were billboards put up. They searched the lake. They had everything, and they were turning up nothing.
County 911.
Yes, ma'am. We just left our house to go fishing near Long Shoals boat ramp, and we went down towards the dam, Rock Island, and that way we can't get close enough to it, and I don't want to get close enough to it, but it appears like a body floating in the water against a tree over here.
It became apparent as we pulled closer that it wasn't just, something floating in the water. It was a person.
We didn't know our mother's whereabouts. There was a sliver of hope that she was still alive.
We were there when the Putnam County Sheriff came off of Lake Oconee moments after physically pulling a body out of the water that he believes is 87-year-old Shirley Derman.
I'm going to tell you a little bit at the office, okay? If you want the stench of death, I'll rub it on you. This is the approximate area. Past that buoy there is where we located Mrs. Derman's body. It had come up and floated and caught on the top of one of the submerged trees. As quick as I arrived on my scene, myself and the FBI agent pulled the body from the water.
The decomposition was extreme. They could tell that she had all of her clothes on, even her shoes. This was a woman who was ready for her day.
Being submerged in the river is a huge thing for criminals. DNA could be washed off. Any kind of important evidence could have been hindered during that time.
What makes the difference is that how someone can take a life and just throw it away.
Shirley's body was to be concealed forever, whoever did it. Tied to her ankles was a mesh bag with 2 cement blocks in it.
They were thinking that 60 pounds would be enough to anchor her to the lake floor. But if you're a killer, you would know it takes a substantial amount of force to keep someone down.
One of the things that's really fascinating about this case is the contradictions. Russell Derman's murder was more careful. They were careful to keep the blood from seeping out underneath the garage, but they wanted him to be found. They left him there. Mrs. Derman, it seemed a lot more rushed. They went to great risk taking her body out to the lake 5 miles away. There's lots of opportunities where they could have been caught. Were they amateurs? Were they professionals? Well, there's evidence of both.
I believe there's more than one individual involved in this crime, certainly, maybe even more than 2.
It was just too much work. Taking her body from the house down to the boat, even though she was an elderly woman, it still would have been a lot of effort that one person couldn't have done. We discovered with the autopsy of Shirley Derman that her body had been bludgeoned badly.
Massive trauma to the back of her head. Probably the worst open skull fracture I've ever seen.
That's a violent death. What happened to her? She was dead when her body hit the water.
The sheriff has said it could be a hammer. He said it could have been from a piece of wood.
I can definitely say the wounds on the head are consistent with coming from a hammer. According to the autopsy, there were circular and semicircular wounds on the head. It's just how the hammer hit. It just got this part or it got the whole head. If it has a distinct marking on it, I could look at her head and say, I know that this hammer was the one that was used.
One of the things we don't really know for sure is where Shirley Derman was killed. Was it inside the house? Probably not, because there's no signs of it.
I don't think they were murdered at that house. I think they were taken somewhere. Mrs. Derman had 2 and possibly a 3rd impacts with a blunt object that penetrated the skull. There should have been cast off blood from that. That was not present in that garage.
It's going to be violent and it's dirty. I set up a demonstration where we use a modified rat trap. We place blood on the rat trap. I let the trap go. There's going to be spatter in all directions, and there's no way that you could account for that. You don't know where that spatter's going to go because you're striking a blood source.
For whatever reason, these people were singled out. They're on a cul-de-sac in a gated, multi-million-dollar resort community that we have no crime in.
There's not a lot of people that live there full time. These are just lake houses and weekend getaway houses for so many people.
We don't know whether they came by land or they came by water. They could have come by boat.
So it wouldn't be hard to do what we just did, get a boat, 5 minutes on the water. Here you are. The sheriff's boat and the crime tape is the giveaway. This is where it happened. And a boat on the water, even at night here, wouldn't be unusual. Now, we're not saying whoever carried out this crime actually came by water, but to a lot of people here, it makes sense.
Potentially they came by car, left by car, came back by boat, left by boat multiple times.
We know Mrs. Derman's body was disposed of by boat simply because where it came up, it couldn't have been disposed of in any other manner. That's a good 5 to 6 miles from here.
Typically, if you entered by the road, there would be a security gate that you would have to pass through that would record your picture and all that.
So this is the guard shack.
These bars weren't here then.
Hello.
Hey, I'm Sheriff Seals.
Okay.
Thank you.
Was security like that 5, 6 years ago?
It was more lax then. If you had a sticker, Reynolds decal, they waved you through. If you said you were going to the clubhouse for lunch, they pretty much waved you through. Every contractor on earth, every electrician, plumber had a decal.
There was apparently a video security system at that checkpoint, but it had not been working. Apparently, the storms had knocked it offline, and there was no way to go back and see who may have been coming and going through that gate.
You have to wonder, were they that lucky to just happen to come upon the house when their security footage was not available?
I don't think the perpetrators knew that the camera wasn't working. Then again, it could have been somebody inside the community.
It's not an easy place to find. You have to know where you're going. Hard to imagine somebody's going to stumble upon the Derman's house.
What about security cameras? Was there any?
Well, no, we pulled every one there was.
Is this a camera surveilled community? Even
No.
Doorbell cameras?
No. There was no such thing as a doorbell camera then. We found several docks and things like that did have them.
Yeah.
But the cameras were pointed at the boats, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
Didn't pick up anything out. Every place that did have a camera, we asked about it, and none of it helped us at all.
The Dermans at their own residence, they also had a security alarm, but it was never activated when this could have happened.
They pretty much established early on that they probably knew this person. They always kept their doors locked, but there was no sign of a forced entry. The door was most likely opened for whoever this was, and that would indicate that they knew who it was.
Anytime you've got an unsolved murder, people sometimes want to assume it's a family member.
We were all, suspects.
Everybody's the suspect except me.
Putnam County 911. I think I have somebody dead.
The neighbors just were floored. They've got a headless body.
I don't know where the other one is.
10 days later, the deceased body of Mrs. Derman floats up.
It appears like a body floating in the water against a tree over here.
It's not the type of neighborhood for random crime. And it damn sure isn't the circumstances of a decapitated man and an 88-year-old man in his home being a random crime.
Was it one of our neighbors who might be this horrific double murderer? Or was this just somebody passing through?
To have the head taken from the scene is even more of a crazy thing.
There was nothing to indicate any kind of robbery. There were things of value there.
There was jewelry. There was Rolex watches.
Nothing was taken. A gated community, no crime, wealthy people. I think that money probably had something to do with it.
The last day that anyone saw him that we know of, he'd made a transfer at the bank to pay for nursing home insurance. Annual premium was due.
They were looking at everybody. It was such a wide net because they had no real idea what had happened. All they knew was this was probably personal, because why else would they kill them that way? That requires a certain level of just depravity that's rare.
We were all suspects.
Let me tell you, the only person that's not a suspect, Sheriff Seals, because I know where I was.
The Dermans have 3 adult children. Right away, they're going to be the first people you look at because the personal nature of the killings.
We've got their cell phone records. We know where they were on the day, and I polygraphed all 3 of them.
Whoever did this, they didn't want Shirley Derman to be found. That points away from the kids having any involvement if they're trying to get some inheritance money or anything like that, because as long as she was missing, their assets would be frozen.
Wouldn't their motive have been, if it was going to be one of them, to do it before they were in their late 80s when they had not been living off of their retirement?
They passed polygraphs not only about did they do it, but did they know something that they weren't telling us.
There was nothing there to link them to the murders, and there was a lot of thought that maybe someone was sending a message to one of the kids through their parents. Hey, this is what's going to happen to you.
Nobody knew if this was isolated to just mom and dad or this was some sort of issue with the entire family.
14 years before Russell and Shirley were murdered, their son was murdered in Atlanta during a drug deal gone bad.
Our oldest brother, Mark, he had a really severe drug and alcohol problem from his teenage years all the way through his adulthood.
He had been murdered while trying to purchase drugs. Police made an arrest in that case and a conviction. So there was some thought maybe this is a revenge. But the guy was locked away. Their son was not a dealer. He was just a user. It was not any kind of high-profile figure in the drug trade.
There's no nexus that we could ever determine between that and the Dermond's murder at all.
They had lived there on this lake quietly for a long time. If this were revenge, it was extremely delayed revenge. So the revenge theory just made no sense.
They didn't seem to have any enemies. There didn't seem to be an old business partner from 20 years ago or someone that was fired who said, I'm going to get you for this.
If you had to name any couple within the community, Russ and Shirley Dermond would definitely be the least likely to be a target of someone.
One of the more popular theories is that maybe the mob was involved.
When you hear about a decapitation murder, well, your mind goes, oh my God, it was a mob hit. This is something that only the mafia would do.
What do you think about this idea of a mafia was involved?
There's nothing to talk about.
It's remarkable how many people think, because these people are from New Jersey, they're in the mafia. There's nothing.
The sheriff had the FBI come in. They did a profile. They said the killer likely liked to hunt, use knives.
Well, guess what? That's 95% of the people in Georgia. Okay. Did we interview everybody in Great Waters or everybody that owns a home or property there? No, we didn't. But I think we interviewed like 250 people in one day. We did phone tower, dumps, polygraph, the yard man, the handyman.
There was one case that popped up that there were a lot of similarities.
She was found in the laundry room, which is just inside the garage.
No sign of forced entry in her home. Wealthy. Wait a minute. Maybe this is something.
Murder mystery in Georgia. An 88-year-old man's mutilated body found in his home in a posh lakeside resort.
Rattling the nerves of a small country club community. A local sheriff says he is working with police departments in other states to help solve the murders of an elderly couple.
This is such a troubling case, such a gruesome crime.
It was all over the local news, the national news, that a headless body was found right here on Lake Oconee. 10 days later, Shirley, her body surfaces, and it's miles and miles away. It's been tied down with blocks.
While police admit this is a true whodunit for them, they don't think it was random.
No evidence of any forced entry or struggle or things like that.
There was one case that popped up that there were a lot of similarities. A socialite in New York in her 80s.
Lois Colley, wife of Eugene Colley, who became fabulously wealthy, building an empire of McDonald's restaurant franchises.
She was found in the laundry room, which is just inside the garage, and she was lying on the floor.
There was no sign of forced entry.
Cause of death is blunt force trauma. We don't have any suspects.
They had 200 McDonald's franchises. It was a huge estate.
The Dermonds had some Hardee's chains down here. No sign of forced entry. Wealthy. Wait a minute. Maybe this is something.
Maybe there's some connection.
There's a pattern. There's similarities. But it was a coincidence. They found the killer up there. It was nobody with any ties to Georgia or not been in Georgia. Could not have been involved in the Dermonds killings.
The lady had been beaten to death with a fire extinguisher, and they made an arrest.
Russell Dermond was dead when he was decapitated. It's not indicative that a blunt force object was used to kill Mr. Dermond, because I would have expected to see some kind of spatter.
He had some gunshot residue on his shirt, so we're assuming he was shot.
The thought was that there was a bullet that had been lodged inside his head, and that's why he was decapitated, because that would be evidence. There was no shell casings found. Just the residue on the collar was all the evidence that there might have been a gunshot fired.
We didn't see any evidence of a bullet hole in a wall or anything like that. That's one of the things that's so mysterious about this case, is that we can infer that that is a very plausible, if not likely, scenario for how Mr. Dermond died. But without more information, that can't be proven.
If we ever had access to Mr. Dermond's head and he was in fact shot in the head, we could recover the bullet, a piece of the bullet. No two guns are alike. No two guns could ever be alike. They're like the fingerprints on your hand. So if we had the bullet, we could determine the manufacturer of the weapon that fired the bullet. We could track it back to an individual gun and then the owner, and that would give us at least a lead. If I were going to shoot someone in the head and I would not want the bullet to penetrate their skull, I would use a .22. This is a lead bullet. That's the key. 9mm, 380s, 357s, all of these are metal jacketed bullets. They have a copper jacket. So as it goes through, it's not going to break up the way that a lead bullet, so when it gets hot, this gets soft. It's lead. So as it goes in the skull, it's going to fragment into pieces. It doesn't normally penetrate all the way through the skull because it's a lead bullet. I performed a demonstration where I shot into a series of wooden blocks because I wanted to show how many layers that a .22 would penetrate. In this case, it looks like it's penetrated to the 5th layer. A 9mm would go through 8 boards. A .45 would go through 7 boards. I've got a .357 Magnum that would go through 15 boards. So you see a .22 only penetrated 5 boards. That's very minimal.
My hunch is that Russell's body was never intended to be left there. They intended to remove him from the residence as well, but for whatever reason they couldn't. So maybe the next best thing from the killer's perspective was to remove the head and the evidence that is probably contained in or on that head. I think the killers were not professionals, but they were intelligent. They knew enough to cover their tracks enough to really make this very difficult for investigators.
Do you have any insight on who was killed first?
We have some evidence that indicates that it might have been at the same time.
Based on evidence, it looked like some of Mom's hair was collected from our dad's hand, so it looks like maybe, perhaps they were together. He tried to protect her.
I think there was some acquaintance with him because, again, Mr. Dermond, he was 88 years old, but he was kind of a tough old bird from what I understood, and I can't see him going easy. There's no evidence of anything being disturbed, no evidence of any struggle.
In all likelihood, somebody did see at least one of the killers that day.
We actually had a witness through the woods that saw someone.
This is not where something like this occurs.
Well, a beheading is not where it occurs anywhere. We actually had a witness through the woods that saw someone in the Dermond's yard that Saturday.
The day of the Kentucky Derby party, earlier that day, a neighbor did remember seeing someone in the Dermond's yard.
This was a number of yards away. It was kind of off in the distance. The sheriff believes, and I think he's right, that's probably the killer, or one of them.
It fits within the timeline when they think the murders happened. They could have been there for an extended period of time. They could have been there most likely several hours.
Witness couldn't describe the race or the age or the build of the individual.
Almost like a ghostly figure that just adds to the eeriness of this case.
She assumed it was a man because of the stride he was taking.
Unfortunately, the witness didn't get a good enough look to provide a whole lot of useful details. We all wish that eyewitness had gotten a better look. A lot of people wonder if is there a serial killer on the loose, or was this some type of a cult killing? Maybe, but there's not been any other murders around there. So it's not a serial killer.
We can't find anything similar before it or anything similar after it.
It's an isolated event, so by definition, it's not a serial killer.
Then you start getting into the realm of some sort of Charles Manson type religious cult deal.
Maybe, but if there is, there's none that anybody's aware of, and Howard Sills knows his community pretty well. There's just no evidence to support any of those speculative theories.
Is this just a thrill kill? Is this just somebody out there just to scare people who just did it for the thought they could get away with it? Nothing makes sense. There's nothing that would lead you to think that this is how these people's lives would end. No financial irregularities. The kids didn't have any connections with unsavory characters.
Howard Sills has been doing this a very, very long time, and he's got a nearly perfect record of solving homicides. This file is not sitting on a shelf gathering dust. It's not. You can go to his office today and you'll see it right there front and center. Boxes and boxes of stuff.
At this juncture, we don't know of any DNA evidence other than DNA from Russell and Shirley. They were all matter of fingerprints, but none that were identifiable.
They used luminol. They looked for prints. They dusted everything. It was very thoroughly processed.
With forensic assistance, there had been some evidence of trying to clean up something there between the cars. There were many peculiarities about the scene that simply didn't make sense and still don't make sense today.
We had access to things in this case that you normally don't as a reporter. He showed us some evidence that he's got. It's evidence that could seal the deal.
This was one of the most horrifying murders we've seen in the North Georgia area, if not the entire United States, in a very long time.
When Russ and Shirley Dermond were killed, it was a major shock to this community that something that violent could occur to a couple that was pretty unassuming and no one would dislike.
This hasn't happened before. So I don't care if it's Buckhead, or Bangladesh. When you have a crime like this in the neighborhood, people are going to be upset.
We had access to things in this case that you normally don't as a reporter. He showed us some evidence that he's got. We can't just talk about it because it might compromise the investigation. It's not something that will point him to the killer or killers, but it was something that once the killers are identified or there's some leads that might point to somebody, it's evidence that could seal the deal.
Is the answer you're looking for in that evidence room?
There's something there that we can compare. I think they were targeted, and I always will. Somebody that wanted them dead and was mad at them. It was either some sort of extortion/robbery, some financial gain from their demise, someone that thought they had something of value. Either they didn't have it or they didn't give it up if they did. Or maybe they did and they killed them in the end.
This case has been by far the most baffling. Russell Dermond's head's not been found. The house has been sold. They've got new security up there.
I think what it's going to take is somebody giving us a call because somebody knows who did this. They need to tell because they're going to do this again. Anybody who'll do this will do anything. There are people that know about this.
If it can happen to them in this place, it can happen to us. So we need this case solved. This was somebody's parents. These were a mother and a father, grandmother, grandfather. They need justice.
Just trying to keep it together, I'm sorry. My folks, particularly my dad, is in my dreams probably more than anybody. And then there have been times where it seems like he's giving me a lead on solving this. We get very close and then it just seems unturned. So
when I tell you I think about this case every day, I'm not exaggerating. It's the only murder case in my career that I've not been able to solve, so it's a personal challenge, it's a personal embarrassment to some extent. But it's my responsibility. It's my duty to find out who did this. God willing, we're coming for you.
If you have any information about the Dermans murders, please call the Putnam County Sheriff's Office at 706-485-8557.
You can ask anybody in this community, do you know about the Morenci boys?
Everybody in Morenci knew Andrew, Alexander, and Tanner. Everybody. They vanished into thin air.
I mean, there's an Amber Alert out for my children. How does this happen? You know, I live in rural America. That doesn't happen. Where are my boys?
On the day after Thanksgiving in 2010, as most Americans are thinking about leftovers, football, and Black Friday shopping, there was disturbing news out of a small town of about 2,000 people on the Michigan-Ohio border.
Thanksgiving weekend here at the station, and I remember when initial Amber Alert came in.
My producer gets into my ear at about 10:40, and she says, the Morenci police chief just called, and he's got a couple of missing boys, and he wants to get their pictures on the air.
It was really critical for me in my mind to get that information out to try to get the boys home as soon as possible.
I think anytime you have an Amber Alert, it's obviously a big deal in a newsroom, but this was a holiday weekend. It was Black Friday.
They faxed us some photos into the newsroom. They came in really late, so we actually stayed on a couple extra minutes past 11 o'clock to make sure we got these on, letting people know that these kids were missing from Morenci.
3 brothers are missing. Andrew Skelton, 9, Alexander Skelton, 7, and Tanner Skelton, 5. Their parents are separated, and they are spending part of the holiday with their dad. They are last seen on Thanksgiving Day, playing in his backyard in a quiet neighborhood in Morenci, Michigan.
I think everyone's first question was, Morenci, where's Morenci?
Morenci is literally off the beaten path. It's a small town kind of situated just north of the Ohio border. It is like a one stoplight town where you can drive through it in about 10 seconds if you catch that light right.
Your typical small town America community. You don't hear about major crime. I couldn't even tell you the last time there was a homicide there. I remember thinking to myself that this just sounded like a mix-up.
Live to Michigan, Amber Alert. 3 young brothers, just 5, 7, and 9 years old. They're missing tonight. Michigan State Police and the FBI say the little boys are in extreme danger. Last seen on Thanksgiving.
Residents are asked to be on the lookout for a woman named Joanne Taylor, thought to be driving a silver or gray minivan. The boy's father, John Skelton, said the boys were with her.
John claims that Joanne took the kids the night of Thanksgiving and that they were safe and sound with her.
She was bringing them home, but unfortunately he had to go to the hospital, so he wasn't quite sure where they were at right now, but he assured us they were safe and they were with her and her husband.
The 3 little boys, all under 10 years old, still in elementary school.
5, 7, and 9. And they were always together. The 3 of them, they were each other's best friends, and they did everything together. Andrew, he was This little old man stuck in a little boy's body. So grown up, wise beyond his years, wasn't a computer game that he couldn't master. And so caring. He would crawl on your lap, put his arm around you, and just do this little tap with his hand. Alexander. He's my little daredevil. 7 years old, he's already had stitches twice. Not afraid of anything. Dirt bikes, pedal bikes, four-wheelers. Just being outside. Loved being outside. Loved teaching his little brother all the fun things to do outside. And then there's Tanner, who was still a baby. I mean, 5 years old. Mommy's little boy. Loved to cuddle. Was just starting to read. Loved that. Finally he's able to do things that his brother did. Wanted to be like his big brothers. Followed them around.
The boys' parents, Tanya and John Skelton, had split a couple of months before the boys disappeared. Tanya had sole custody of the boys, but agreed to let Andrew, Alexander, and Tanner stay with their father for Thanksgiving.
Tanya and John are living in separate houses. John's in the family home, and Tanya is like a block and a half away. You can see from her yard back to that house.
John, he said that on Wednesday night, the night before Thanksgiving, the boys asked for fried chicken and birthday cake. And that he made them their favorite dinner, and they watched a karate movie.
She allowed him to have the boys, over Thanksgiving, and they were supposed to return the next day.
That Friday after Thanksgiving, Tanya's like, all right, well, there's a football game I want to take the boys to. Where are you guys? Can I come get them?
I sent him a text message, and he's like, well, we're not home right now. And we went back and forth, I'm just going, it just wasn't making sense, but okay. Then he says, the boys are with my friends, and he says, I'm at the hospital. I fell off a ladder.
So Tanya and I believe her sister Tennille, they want to get in the house. Tanya, I know she had talked to the police there, and they said don't do anything.
Tanya says her divorce attorney also advised that she wait to take action until 3 p.m., the time she and the boys' father, John Skelton, had originally agreed he'd drop off the boys. 3 p.m. comes and goes, and Tanya decides to go to John Skelton's home.
I don't care if I get in trouble. I'm going over there. We couldn't get in the house. There was a board wedged to the door into the steps that go upstairs. And I'm like, okay, now I know something is not right.
Police arrive at the Skelton home. They kick down the door to get in and are shocked by what they find inside. Tanner, Alexander, and Andrew Skelton were last seen on Thanksgiving Day, playing in the backyard at their father's house. The next day, their dad, John Skelton, was supposed to return the boys to their mother, Tanya. That never happened.
I recall waking up the next morning and just assuming that they'd be found. All day Saturday, nothing. Getting into Sunday, nothing. Once we kind of got into Monday, it started to really hit me. These kids they could possibly be in trouble.
The search is on for a mystery woman named Joanne Taylor and her husband, Mark. People John Skelton said were friends of his and were taking care of the boys.
Joanne Taylor's name becomes like the biggest clue they have at first. So this is the lead.
We had a whole team of people involved in this investigation, doing lots of great work to help locate the boys. And there was one member that was assigned to locate Joanne Taylor.
Meanwhile, volunteers are rallying in Morenci to help try to find Andrew, Alex, and Tanner. The Morenci Fire Department is tasked with leading the volunteer searches, with direction from law enforcement. The fire hall becomes a command center. While the fire department is leading hundreds of volunteers in careful searches of the area, investigators continue to look for any trace of this Joanne Taylor.
They did a great deal of research and investigation based on the information that John Skelton gave us, where this person possibly lived, cars that potentially that person would be driving, all sorts of computer searches, interagency research, federal research, state research, records searches.
John Skelton is in a hospital about 40 miles away in Toledo, Ohio. Tanya says he told her that he had an accident while doing some work around the house. But she says she was later given different information by hospital staff.
The nurse proceeded to tell me that Mr. Skelton came in as an attempted suicide. My heart stopped. I'm like, excuse me? And the rope broke. He fell and had a broken ankle.
The officer responding to the Skelton home says he saw the evidence of the alleged suicide attempt.
The noose was kind of hanging in the entryway of the stairwell. As you go up the stairs, it kind of right angles a couple times and then to the top floor. The noose was tied around the banister at the top level, and then it was tied to my bedroom upstairs, to the doorknob of the bedroom.
He had attempted to hang himself. It was a very thin rope from a stair banister of a stairwell.
Officer Hillard went to the hospital to speak to John Skelton.
He had some ligature marks around his neck, and then he also had, I believe, an injury to one of his ankles. He was under a whole lot of mental stress. He would close his eyes and, make a noise like he was trying to force whatever was going on in his head out of his head.
Skelton would later deny he tried to take his own life, but wouldn't explain how he was injured. Also raising questions, a Facebook message that appeared on Dad John Skelton's page Wednesday night.
Tanya then saw him post something on Facebook, and she immediately called Chief Weeks and said, "I'm disturbed. John has posted this. He didn't bring the boys back. I'm worried that something's happened."
A desperate race against the clock to find 3 little boys who were feared to be in horrible danger, or worse. The brothers spent Thanksgiving with their dad, and now, tonight, they are missing.
Police are trying to figure out what was going on in John Skelton's home in the hours leading up to the boys' disappearance. There was a post made to his Facebook profile the day before Thanksgiving, referring to his estranged wife, Tanya.
He went on Facebook and said, "May God and Tanya forgive me."
When police responded to Mom Tanya's report that the boys didn't return after a visit, the condition of John Skelton's home alarmed them.
I've stood over a number of bodies on homicides and very tragic scenes, and when I look at this particular scene, it's eerie.
Things were pushed over, mirrors were broken, computers were broken, cords were cut off, all the electronics. It was just debris and mess throughout the entire house. Like someone had ransacked it, basically.
The marriage had been strained for months since another incident involving the boys in September of that year. Tanya says it started when John Skelton started talking about moving from Michigan to his home state in Florida.
John goes back to a high school reunion, and he runs into some old friends. He comes back from that reunion, and all of a sudden, he's very quick to say we should move the family to Florida.
Tanya was skeptical and needed to find out if she could leave Michigan because she has a criminal record.
I was going to make phone calls. We needed to see what I needed to do to be able to move.
John decides that he's going to just make things happen. So he picks the kids up early one day from school.
There was a message from the school wanting to know what was going on, John just signed the boys out. Said, you guys are going to Florida on a family vacation. And I went, what? I don't know anything about this.
Tanya didn't want John Skelton to leave the state with the boys, so she got the police involved and called a lawyer who drew up paperwork to attempt to stop Skelton.
I had to file for divorce, and I said, do whatever you have to do. I don't want him getting to Florida with these boys.
But before the paperwork could be served, Skelton got wind of Tanya hiring an attorney.
John is furious, storms out. John gets the two older boys in the car and peels out of the driveway.
He was able to get the oldest two boys, put them in the van. Almost ran over my dad and my sister as he was backing out of the driveway. The boys were not in seatbelts. They were still standing, crying, wanting out of the van.
Skelton made it to Florida with the two oldest boys. Tanya followed, and they went before a judge there, who ruled the boys should go back to Tanya. When they returned to Michigan, she had full custody, and as far as Tanya was concerned, the marriage was over.
I said, you've broken this huge bond, of this huge wall of trust by taking off. And of course his argument was, well, I told you I wanted to move. I said, you said you wanted. You didn't say you were going to. And you took my children.
Tanya says that on the advice of an attorney, she agreed to give John Skelton visits with their sons.
The Thanksgiving holiday, and he wanted to have them and have Thanksgiving dinner with his family that's here in Morenci. And I said, that's fine. I want them Black Friday and that Saturday. Unfortunately, didn't happen.
With the boys missing, their father hospitalized after an alleged suicide attempt, the family home destroyed, and massive searches underway, there is a glimmer of hope, a possible sighting of the boys.
The two older ones were really, they didn't act like they wanted to come through that door when they first came in. And they kind of huddled together.
Prayers for Andrew, Alex, and Tanner. The three Skelton brothers police say remain in grave danger the longer they go missing. No one has seen them since Thanksgiving, and everyone here is praying they are out there somewhere and safe. Today marked another day of dozens of volunteers searching this tiny town for any signs of the little boys. Working with few, if any, leads, neighbors here spending the day traipsing through wooded areas, even streams.
In the days after the boys were reported missing, volunteers combed the area around Morenci, Michigan, the boys' hometown. The focus of investigators is trained on the account given by the boys' father, who said he left the boys with a friend.
At this point, we have been able to eliminate the reported established relationship between Joanne Taylor and Mr. Skelton.
Investigators cannot locate anyone named Joanne Taylor, who is able to verify John Skelton's story. So they need to figure out what John Skelton was doing and where he was the night of Thanksgiving into the early morning hours of Friday.
We decided with the staff that we had and the numbers of volunteers that were coming in, we just start searching big swaths of areas that we believe that John Skelton had traveled as early morning hours on Black Friday.
Using cell phone records, investigators were able to determine that John Skelton's phone was likely in his residence up until 4:19 a.m. on Friday, November 26th. But at 4:23 a.m., the phone was moving. At 5:02 a.m., the phone pinged near Holiday City, Ohio, a small town on the other side of the state line, about a 30-minute drive from Morenci. There was no more data indicating the phone was turned off or the battery was dead until 6:46 a.m. when the phone pinged back at the Skelton home.
This is the critical time where I think he's done something with the boys. What he did specifically, nobody knows really at this point. I think it's just critical that if anyone really had seen that van or him out during that period of time, those are the tips that this case really needs.
John Skelton says his phone wasn't with him.
He said somebody borrowed his car, his phone was in the car, and that he didn't really know that the car was being moved, so therefore didn't know the phone was being moved.
On the Tuesday after the boys disappeared, police make an announcement about the status of John Skelton.
This afternoon, John Skelton was released from the mental health facility and immediately placed in custody by agents from the Toledo office of the FBI. Warrants were issued for 3 counts of parental kidnapping. Currently he's in custody of the agents at the Toledo office and will be ultimately lodged at the Lucas County Jail.
But investigators are also checking out tips, including alleged sightings of the boys at 2 locations in Ohio. In Sandusky, about 95 miles east of Morenci, an employee at the House of Donuts thinks she spotted the boys with a woman.
The younger one kind of looked up and was looking around. He just didn't know what he wanted at first. Like, he wanted everything. And she kept saying, just pick out your donut, Tanner. Just pick out your donut. That's how the only reason I know his name.
In Bowling Green, Ohio, about a 60-mile drive southeast of the boys' hometown, there's another possible lead.
Former music teacher from Morenci is now telling investigators that she spotted Andrew Alexander and Tanner here at the flea market with a woman matching the description also given by another Ohio woman, a worker at a donut shop in Sandusky.
Investigators are working to verify the reports of sightings in Ohio and come up empty.
Based on the information that we have, we do not anticipate a positive outcome here. There was lots of tips coming in still about the boys being alive, but the reality was with the evidence that we have, it was important to us and me to make sure that people were looking in the right places as it relates to where we thought the boys were as opposed to where they probably weren't.
John Skelton told investigators the boys were with a female friend, but in court for a divorce proceeding, John Skelton gives the judge a different explanation for the boys' disappearance.
John Skelton appeared without an attorney and mumbled his way through the judge's questions.
Do you know the location or whereabouts of your children?
No, I do not. The judge then asked Skelton whether he is unwilling or unable to tell the court where the children are, and he said unable, and then launched into his newest version of what happened to his 3 young sons on Thanksgiving Day.
Were they accompanied by anybody?
Yes.
Who were they accompanied by?
A person in a van.
Pardon me?
A person in a van.
Did you know the person?
I knew the organization, but I didn't know the person, no.
What organization?
The organization that took me.
When the judge asks what organization Skelton starts hemming and hawing and says he'd rather not say.
I think the challenge John had was that he kept telling us different information and sharing different information with the media, different reporters.
Investigators have uncovered evidence from John Skelton's computer.
So when asked about the computer searches, that was one that was very much a very strange response to lead me to believe he was obviously not being truthful about, why he did those searches in the time frame that he did.
Police in Michigan should have a little bit more on that search. It has been underway for days now to hopefully find alive these 3 missing boys.
The first days and weeks of the search for the boys were surreal, says their mother Tanya.
Thoughts go through your mind. Where are they at? Are they safe? Are they warm? Are they fed? Are they together? Who has them? Why isn't someone coming forward? How can you hide my 3 active little boys?
Tanya says she struggles to understand her former husband's behavior.
And knowing the destruction that was in the house, what did he do? He was a good dad.
Investigators want to know more about searches they say were done on John Skelton's computer right around Thanksgiving.
was a search right around the time the boys went missing in that time frame. You know, does rat poison kill? You know, can you strangle someone's neck with your bare hands?
Actually had some images there that involved, you know, breaking a neck that he probably was looking at. You know, anytime you have a missing child and somebody's looking up that kind of information similar to the time frame that they went missing, that's just very, very disturbing.
When confronted about this at one point, I believe he said it was reference to some fantasy online video game he was playing.
When I asked John about those searches, at first he denied them, and he has denied them in the past. And then he said that the boys were very into karate movies and video games at the time. They had watched a karate movie and watched a ninja movie, and he said the boys specifically asked him to look those things up on his computer.
In early 2011, just a couple of months after the boys' disappearance, Morenci police announced this is now a homicide investigation.
Based on information we've collected throughout the entirety of this case, meeting with the investigative task force, and after making an assessment of where we're at, it was determined that from this point forward, this is no longer a missing persons case, but a murder investigation.
In custody on parental kidnapping charges, John Skelton makes his own explosive allegations against the boy's mother, Tanya.
Boys told me that Tanya was reported sex with them, which I tried to confirm with Tanya. You know, but Tanya wouldn't have anything to do with me. She talked to me about it or anything, and alienated me and started alienating the kids from me and stuff. And I have to go with, you know, I don't think my kids would lie to me.
I don't know how he can say that. For him to even suggest kills me inside. That he would stoop that low and openly lie. It confirms that I don't think he ever really loved me. I know I never abused my children. My boys know I never abused them. God knows that I never abused my children.
John made all sorts of allegations after that initial incident involving the kids when he ended up going to court to try to fight to keep them when Tanya was successful in having them brought back. And as far as any legitimate report, I'm not aware of any. I challenged him on what evidence he might have, and he was never able to provide any definitive information.
Skelton points out that Tanya has a criminal conviction for fourth-degree criminal sexual conduct involving a 14-year-old boy. Tanya says Skelton knew about her conviction before they even started dating.
He knew that before he ever met me, that I had a felony conviction. I was still on parole when I met him.
Tanya has been cleared by police in her son's disappearance, although John Skelton continues to accuse her of abuse. He says he wants to talk to her.
She hasn't talked to me since the 26th of November. Just stop treating me this way because I didn't do anything wrong. I'm just trying to find a way to get people to talk to me, to get her to talk to me, to get to the bottom of what the boys had said.
In February of 2011, new charges are filed against John Skelton. In addition to the parental kidnapping counts, he is arraigned on unlawful imprisonment charges and kidnapping. His bail is raised to $90 million. To this day, Skelton claims the boys are safe and are with some kind of group.
story evolved into he had given them to an underground organization. He had given them to some organization for safety.
Operate CNN. There's no pictures of these people. We covered our tracks well.
In a series of interviews from jail with the Detroit Free Press, Skelton said that he gave them to two people named Sue and Elijah, part of something called underground sanctuaries. Skelton said he met Sue and Elijah at a truck stop.
He had said that this group had come to the house 2 or 3 times to visit to see if the kids who they already had in the group were compatible with his kids. But no neighbor sees a van. No neighbor sees other kids. Nothing in the house. No records that we found.
Skelton said he was trying to make up his mind when the group intervened and took the boys. Quote, "I believe they implemented their program because I wasn't doing my job," he said. Quote, "I was letting them go back to Tanya."
His position is always that he has given the children for safety reasons to a group of people. He felt they were that they were in danger of being with their mother.
With Skelton's no contest plea on the unlawful imprisonment charges, the other charges, including kidnapping, are dropped. His lawyer in the case says Skelton was prepared to testify if the case went to trial, and insists he acted for the good of the boys.
With me, I can't tell you what he said, but I can tell you he's never said anything about having harmed these children or done anything to harm them.
I do love my boys. Skelton maintains he gave his sons to an organization. He also told the court he thought the group would bring the boys back when their mother no longer had custody.
When all of a sudden the news came in, remains were found in Missoula, and you start to kind of play that game in your head. Why Missoula, Montana?
The 3 Skelton brothers, 9-year-old Andrew, 7-year-old Alex, and 5-year-old Tanner, have been missing since the day after Thanksgiving of 2010. Their father, John Skelton, is in prison for unlawful imprisonment in the case. Investigators say they have been unable to confirm any of the details Skelton has given about where they might be, including a claim they are with an Amish community.
We visited several. We had some families say to us, well, if someone dropped off 3 boys who needed a home, then maybe we would help them. And then on the flip side of that, we had many Amish families say, but you know what? We still hear about things in the newspaper. We still know about major stories or major cases and things that are going on, and we'd be the first to take these boys to the police.
He has gone as far as to name somebody, saying that he had a point of contact within a group.
I was doing a visit with John. Every few months I would go visit him. Out of the blue, he said, I've got a name for you.
And he named Mose Gingrich. He's on a television show. From what I've been told, that television show was on a TV station which was allowed to be watched within prison walls.
Michigan State Police make contact with Mose Gingrich, who says he's never heard of John Skelton. Gingrich agrees to visit John Skelton in prison.
If I bring this person and set him in front of you, you think there would have been a big hug and let's try to start putting our notes together, our heads together to bring these boys back. And he was scared to death and wanted nothing to do with this interview. He admitted that that was a lie. The whole thing was a lie.
Did these groups exist at all?
I've never ran across one, especially to the level of sophistication.
But in late 2017, Michigan State Police announced a potential break in the case. Evidence found almost 2,000 miles away.
The lead investigator for the Michigan State Police confirms he's reached out to Missoula Police about a case involving 3 missing brothers from the small town of Morenci, Michigan. The boys' ages match the general ages of the skeletal remains found in Missoula.
Bones were found in a shed behind a rental property in Missoula, Montana, after the tenant was evicted.
We were very interested because I think the initial pathology report was that they were, right at the age range.
Everybody thought this is it. This is the missing link, and this is what police have been looking for.
And when the analysis of the bones came back weeks later, after a more thorough test was done, it was found that the bones were very, very old.
Bones found in Montana were more than 99 years old, according to the forensics report, and were from someone of Asian or American Indian descent. Another dead end. But in the spring of 2019, another promising lead.
A woman finally came forward and said it was Black Friday. She remembered seeing a man matching John Skelton's description in a minivan, and she finally felt like she had enough courage to come forward and show police the area where she had seen him.
We went through every square inch of the lake using all the technology at our disposal, and we didn't find anything.
Although this particular tip did not lead to the boys, investigators think the key to solving this case may be a witness who might have crossed paths with John Skelton in the early morning hours of the day after Thanksgiving.
That time frame and that van is what we need information about. Where was John? What was he doing during that time? And if people really want to help, that's where the information's got to come from. We would hope that people would call in tips for that piece of information that we really need to close this out.
Investigators still continue to interview John Skelton, hoping for more information about his son's whereabouts.
Whenever asked a tough question, he will cower and back down. He'll never look you in the eye and say, this is why I did this, or this is what happened. It's always very much a very weak response with no conviction behind it. I would say if there is a break, it's got to come from him.
The two oldest boys would be in high school now.
Andrew would be a senior. Last year when they were juniors and the prom pictures started showing up, that was hard. Alex's friends are driving. That was Alex's dream. When Tanner's buddies, they started playing school sports. I know they're 8th graders.
Investigators say John Skelton has given multiple accounts to explain who has the boys. He suggested the involvement of Joanne Taylor, Sue, Elijah, the Amish, and a group called the Underground Sanctuary. But none could be connected to the boys' disappearance. At his sentencing, John Skelton claimed that once the boys are over 18, they'll come forward. But as that date approaches, investigators doubt it will bring any answers.
So what will the story be then? That's what interests me. What's the new hustle? What's the new excuse? What's the new diversion tactic to kick the can again? We'll see.
Investigators say John Skelton is the primary suspect in the disappearance of his sons, Andrew, Alexander, and Tanner. John Skelton was denied parole at a hearing in 2020, but has a mandatory release date in 2025. Skelton declined our request for an interview, but did provide this statement. I am committed to finding my children when or if I get out of prison. I love my children and still maintain that I did not harm my children.
This case is very fresh, very much in the public eye. You're still going to find their missing poster 10 years later.
Love to talk about the boys because it keeps them alive. Talking about them, keeping their names out there so that people know that the case is still open. I think that's the best honor I can give them right now.
The investigation into the disappearance of Andrew, Alexander, and Tanner Skelton is still open. If you have any information about the case, please call Michigan State Police at 517-636-0689 or by email at www.michigan.gov/mishtip, MICHTIP.
Check out Lisa's new do. Say hello. Who are you talking to? You dancing?
Dance. Laid her down in her crib and told her I love you.
Around 4 o'clock this morning, we were notified that a 10-month-old had been taken from her home.
Where is 10-month-old baby Lisa?
The baby Lisa case.
Baby Lisa's
Baby Lisa.
This is every parent's worst nightmare.
Please, bring her home.
If this was a break-in, if this was an abduction, why isn't money missing? Why aren't other valuables missing?
Did someone come into that house and take baby Lisa away?
What would be the motivation for taking the baby?
There's a lot of things that just don't make sense that night.
There is no sign of baby Lisa.
One thing that is certain is somebody had to take this baby out of that house. Kansas City, Missouri is a classic Midwestern city, and it's surrounded by solid working-class neighborhoods.
Baby Lisa's family, they were in a very suburban area. It's where people mow their lawns and kids play outside. It certainly wasn't a dangerous neighborhood. Lisa was a 10-month-old baby, and she lived with her parents. This super happy baby. She has gorgeous blue eyes.
Check out Lisa's new do. Say hello.
I'm Deborah Bradley, Lisa's mom. Lisa has a very big personality.
Drink your baba.
She would finish her food and then try to take all of ours. Her dad would put on country music and she would dance with him.
My favorite video of her is definitely the one where she's dancing around a little bit.
You dancing? Dance.
I'm Jeremy Irwin, and I'm Lisa's dad. Lisa, she was kind of the glue that bound us together.
And they're this blended family. Deborah has a child from a previous marriage, and Jeremy has a child from a previous relationship. They're 8, and the other one is almost 6.
Deborah Bradley's a stay-at-home mom, and Jeremy is an electrician. Seems to be a happy, stable family.
The day Lisa was born was amazing. There's nothing that ever sounded or looked more appealing than being a mom and raising babies. It was an amazing moment, and I'll never forget it.
This was an unusual day in Deborah and Jeremy's house because Jeremy was going to work a night shift doing electrical work at a Starbucks. That was unusual.
He generally did not work overnights.
So Jeremy goes to work around 5:30, and Deborah spends time with her next-door neighbor out on the front porch. The boys are in the house. At some point, she puts baby Lisa to bed.
Gave her pacifier, laid her down in her crib, and told her I love you. And good night. And that's the last time I seen her.
Around 3:45 in the morning, Jeremy Irwin returns from this night shift.
He instantly notices
things are a little bit different.
Came in the house and noticed the front door was unlocked, which was obviously pretty unusual.
I don't remember if I locked it that night, but I'm assuming that I did.
Had quite a few lights on, accent lights, stuff like that. Just kind of went through, and a couple of the windows were open. Went to close the window and didn't close all the way, and noticed that this screen was popped out of the corner there. Realized that the metal screen in the frame was pushed in from the outside into where the window would close at. So that was obviously very weird, had never happened before. First thing, checking on the boys, I noticed my oldest was in here and my youngest son was not in here. So I thought to myself, he's got to be in my bedroom. So I leave here, go down the hallway to my bedroom, and Deborah is in here sleeping with our youngest boy.
And he woke me up and he said, "Where's Lisa?" And I said, "She's in her crib. Where else would she be?"
I went back down the hallway, and that's when I noticed that her bedroom door was pushed open a little bit. Normally we keep all the doors closed when everybody's sleeping. Come in here, and this is her crib.
And he realizes his 10-month-old daughter is missing. She is not in her crib asleep where she should be.
Well, she's got to be here somewhere, and how did she get out of the crib? That's kind of when all hell broke loose.
It was just instant panic. I jumped out of bed, and that's when we just started running around in circles trying to find her. We immediately knew something wasn't right. We knew she didn't crawl out and wander around somewhere in the house. We're panicking, we're looking everywhere for her, and we can't find her. We realized the window's broken. We realized that the unthinkable has happened. Someone stole our baby. We went to call 911, and we noticed that the phones were missing.
3 cell phones that were charging in the kitchen are missing.
I ended up calling 911 from my work cell phone that night at about 4 o'clock.
Contact Jeremy. He knows his screen is busted and his 10-month-old daughter is missing.
The Kansas City Police Department spring into action. Officers race to the scene, at one point going 73 miles an hour in dash cam footage.
The mother tells police the last time she saw the baby was 10:40. So you have this gap from 10:40 to 4 a.m. when the dad comes home. It's like, what happened to Lisa in that gap?
Each of the boys were interviewed for about 20 or 30 minutes apiece. They were asleep, and they didn't hear anything.
So then around 7 o'clock in the morning, an Amber Alert is issued. It was an all-hands-on-deck search. There were metal detectors. There were dogs. Investigators wearing these white suits. That's to keep their scent away from the dogs. They also searched neighboring homes.
They're even ripping out decks, and they're looking inside old hidden wells, anywhere you could hide a baby.
So in any investigation like this, police will focus inside the home, on the family members of the missing child.
If the story's kind of hinky, we usually find holes in it pretty quickly, but so far here we are in the afternoon, and we haven't broken anything on it yet.
It appears to be some sort of abduction.
There was a window on the front of the house that appeared to have been tampered with.
But they're also developing a list of other potential suspects, including sex offenders.
Everything from pizza guys to friends that had visited.
It was very unusual that Jeremy was working this night shift. So investigators had to ask, did someone else know that Jeremy would be gone from the house that night?
Was this coincidence? Was this set up so he'd be out of the house and something would be allowed to happen?
I think our family was absolutely targeted. They were waiting for the opportunity to come in our house and steal our kid.
The whole country becomes glued to this story.
When we see the parents for the first time in the media, they are visibly distraught.
We just want to have her back home. We just want our baby
back. Please, bring her home. Our 2 other boys are waiting for her, please.
People instantly judge and react to how the parents are behaving in public.
Deborah's crying. She's holding this Barney stuffed animal that was one of Lisa's.
We're scared to death, and now we're standing in front of all these strangers. The dad, he appears almost like he's in shock.
I just ask you to keep her in her thoughts and prayers. There was so many people and so many cameras.
It's exactly what everybody expected a family going through this trauma to be like. But the tone of these parents going forward would change dramatically.
Earlier, the mother and father decided to quit cooperating with the police. They've been cooperative up to this point.
I just had reached my boiling point, and I asked them, I said, guys, I can't do this anymore today. I need a break. I can't answer any more questions.
Once I couldn't fill in gaps, it turned into, you did it, and just tell everybody where she is so she can come home. And I kept saying, I don't know, I don't know, I don't know.
Instantly, the police are running almost two parallel investigations. They're looking at, is this a kidnapping? Did someone steal this child? But at the same time, they're focusing on this family, especially the mother, because she's the last adult that saw this baby.
So there's a lot of things that just don't make sense that night. Who would break into a house and only steal cell phones? Cell phones that can be used to track somebody.
And if this is a true break-in, why isn't money missing? Why aren't other valuables missing?
The house was, from what I understand, completely spotless, which was strange. No fingerprints.
Did it look like anything was disturbed in her room? I mean, did anything look out of place other than her not being there?
No. It's like they just walked in and just disappeared.
Baby abductions are very rare. In this particular circumstance, what would be the motivation for taking the baby? They didn't have any substantial assets that anybody could be aware of. They would have no access to ransom.
None of this was really adding up. This is not the kind of neighborhood where somebody would target a kidnapping like that. The last thing that intruder would want to take is a baby that can cry at any point, that is going to immediately draw attention.
But police did look at everything. They're looking at the layout. How does somebody get in the house and they don't wake up this mother?
Even though we have baby monitors, I didn't hear anything.
You have two other children in the house that night, and they don't notice anything out of the normal either.
So it wouldn't surprise you that she was picked up without crying?
If you pick her up and you cuddle with her, she probably won't cry.
And many questions were raised about what Deborah and Jeremy did in those early hours. How come they didn't try to call those cell phones to try to find baby Lisa?
There's a lot of things they just can't explain. I mean, how do you explain a child vanishing?
Reassure people, did you have anything to do with the abduction of your daughter?
Absolutely not.
No.
But other neighbors are speculating, wouldn't somebody have noticed something out of the normal? Wouldn't a dog be going nuts? The family, when you talk to them about their dog, they're saying the dog just wasn't a barker, wouldn't have made a lot of noise.
There were dogs in the neighborhood, but none of them were heard barking. I spent weeks in this neighborhood during the day and at night. And in the beginning, these dogs would bark at us, especially when we were in the woods behind the house, or if we approached one of their houses.
This is the barking dog that greets us every time we come back here.
So more and more attention was focused on Deborah and those last hours before baby Lisa went missing. And now Deborah revealed something she had hid from investigators. Well, now, something that would captivate the entire nation.
Pumpkin pie. I mean, I close my eyes, I see her. I can't.
This is every parent's worst nightmare, to walk into your baby's bedroom and she's gone.
This prompts a massive police investigation and has now turned into one of the biggest mysteries in Kansas City.
Deborah tells police that she last checked on baby Lisa around 10:30. Jeremy says when he arrived home, the front door was unlocked, and that a window to the front computer room was open and the screen appeared to have been tampered with.
There was a corner of it that looked like it was bent, like someone had maybe stuck a tool of some kind in and tried to wiggle it loose.
Police decide to see if it's possible to climb into this window, so they stage a reenactment.
And this window is in a computer room, and it's on a side of the house, and it's tucked away from the bedrooms. As they're testing this theory, you have a ton of TV crews outside. And so you can see police officers trying to climb up and into this window.
It was very hard with the elevation of the window to get off the ground and get in. You would have needed a step ladder or a bucket or somebody to boost you, and now you've got two people involved in this whole thing.
Very quickly they realize this takes a lot of time, it makes a lot of noise, and it's very awkward. And at one point the window even crashes down on the officer.
There's just really no reason why someone would have used a window to get into the house when they could have easily tried what was purported to be an unlocked door.
Now the story from Deborah and Jeremy starts to change in some subtle ways and some important ways.
Based on the condition it was in, could someone have gone through that? That you saw?
No.
Do you think they came into that window?
Absolutely.
I think so.
Well, which is it? There was just a lot of inconsistencies with what was being discussed in media interviews.
Well, we know that Jeremy has a pretty solid alibi all night.
There was actual video of him working in the Starbucks through about 3:30 in the morning. And so that turned all of its attention to the mother, to Deborah. Deborah in particular was interviewed by the Kansas City Police Department for as many as 40 hours.
Have you for a second ever thought maybe there was an accident? Maybe something happened?
No.
Maybe she tried to cover it up afterwards?
No.
Maybe there's something with this mom. Maybe there's something more that she's not telling, something she's not admitting.
Almost 2 weeks after Lisa disappears, we get a shocking admission.
Were you drinking that night?
Yes.
How much?
Enough to be drunk.
So you were drunk.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people are going to say, Deborah, you were drunk that night. Is there any chance you did anything that hurt your daughter that you're just not telling us?
No. And if I thought there was a chance, I'd say it. No.
This raises so many red flags. Why did Deborah wait 2 weeks to tell people that she had been drinking that night? Can we trust what she had to say at 4 o'clock in the morning when the police arrived? And it brought even more attention on Deborah Bradley. We know that earlier in the evening, she got a ride with her brother to Festival Foods, a nearby store, and she bought a box of wine.
Was she acting strange in any kind of way?
She had a smile on her face. I mean, like she always does when she comes in here.
We now know that she came back and continued drinking into the night. Says she had 5 to 10 glasses of wine while sitting on the porch with her next door neighbor.
Do you have a drinking problem?
No. I don't think so.
Is it possible you had a blackout?
It's a possibility.
Is it possible you blacked out and something happened to Lisa during that time?
No.
I don't care that she asked about the drinking, but I feel like it has absolutely nothing to do with the fact that someone came in my house and stole my baby.
People in Kansas City are either believing, my gosh, this poor woman, look what she's been through. But you also have a lot of people saying, get real. She's the last person to be with this child. 10-month-olds don't go missing.
People jumped to conclusions and just assumed that because I had been drinking that I had done something wrong.
Okay, someone drinks doesn't make them a murderer, a killer, a liar. She drank.
Could she have just accidentally left the front door open? Her recollections become much more suspect when we know she had been drinking this much.
Could I have heard something had I not been drinking? Maybe. But I believe that these people were intent on taking her.
After Deborah Bradley admits that she was drinking heavily that night, she also changes the timeline of her story. Initially, she had said that she last checked on baby Lisa around 10:30. Now she says it was 6:40, adding almost a 4-hour window to the potential time frame when something could have happened.
And what she was doing was simply condensing facts. And it was one slip-up. It was not an inconsistency.
What nobody realized is that someone just stole my kid. I am trying the best I can to remember every detail.
All of a sudden, police return to the house. A massive search begins.
Everyone is wondering why. Why now? What are they looking for? When I realized the window is broken and my daughter's not here, as a mom, I think it's, a natural thing for you to assume something bad has happened. Somebody had to have taken her.
When the police arrived at the home in the early morning hours of October 4th, it would be typical and expected for them to first look at the people that are closest to the child, and that would be the parents.
Did you kill little Lisa?
No.
Did you sell your baby?
Oh, no.
I get the initial suspicion, but you have to look elsewhere. Because if you're wrong, it's causing that much time, more time for her to be away from her family, for us to live without her.
All of a sudden, police return to the house, this time with a search warrant. A massive search begins.
Everyone is wondering why. Why now? What are they looking for?
They're wearing these white suits.
Like watching a Hollywood movie, we see that they're x-raying the entire house with the bomb trucks.
They're going over every inch of the house, plus this large garage that sits in the backyard. Investigators at the time told us that this is the type of investigation that these law enforcement officers would conduct if they were looking for body parts. But some people also wondered, were these just police tactics to put the pressure on Deborah and Jeremy so they would reveal something new to police? Deborah increasingly is concerned that she is going to be arrested for this.
If they arrest me, people are going to stop looking for her. And then I'll never see her again.
So one question was, how did investigators get a search warrant? When those documents were made public, we learned that an FBI cadaver dog had a positive hit for human decomposition in Deborah and Jeremy's bedroom.
And that's where we know the mother was sleeping that night and the two other children. That really made this case go crazy again.
It's, quite frankly, not that complicated. If there's any residue left over from a diaper, anything, it can be picked up by a cadaver dog. And that's what you had.
According to the experts, that's not true.
I never heard anyone say that a cadaver dog would hit on a poopy pants.
Yeah, that's really an interesting situation. There is a difference between human waste and human remains.
If that was indeed a dirty diaper, why didn't we get a hit somewhere else in the house? Why that particular spot and that spot only?
When Deborah was speaking with investigators, she said she didn't even want to look behind the house for fear of what she might find. That was one of the things that led investigators to dig up the garden area behind their house. There were indications that the earth there had been turned over sometime recently.
A comment she made was twisted incredibly to make it look like she was hiding something. Anyone who was sociopathic and sick enough to kill their child wouldn't dump the baby behind the house and then say, oh, I'm afraid to look behind the house, so let's not look behind the house.
When they finished doing their search was the first time that we had, or I had, an opportunity to go into the home and really take a look around.
I thought the dog alerted on one side or the other of the bed, but as you notice, as you walk around, all the carpeting is intact. That is, it was not cut out, and I personally find that surprising.
So people started to really focus on how Deborah and Jeremy were behaving. Jeremy, very stoic, rarely said anything, and people would wonder then about Deborah. Was she emotional enough? Was she too emotional? Was she behaving the way they expect someone in this situation to behave.
Then why won't you talk to us?
Because we're grieving.
Was that an offhand comment? It just seems unusual that that would be the reply to that.
There was nothing we could do right. People were going to say and think no matter what we did.
They largely stopped talking to the press, and they stopped cooperating with investigators, according to the police.
They stopped giving interviews because the interviews ceased being about trying to help them find the baby and only focused on trying to get them to become defendant 1 and defendant 2 in the disappearance of that baby. It was wrong.
It was counterproductive. It was very clear that they were not on her side.
I'm Phil Houston. I had the opportunity to interview and interrogate spies, double agents, terrorists. I also had the chance to interview Lisa Irwin's parents to determine if they were being deceptive or not. We went out there with a little bit of a bias ourselves, thinking that there's a real good probability that they're involved in this. If you do not tell the truth, for whatever reason, we would know that pretty quickly, all right? Okay. Because that's what we do. If they are guilty, we're going to use a question right up front that increases the odds for us to spot that. We call it a presumptive question. What involvement did you have in the disappearance of Lisa?
None. The only thing I did wrong was drink that night and possibly not be alert, not here. Sorry.
We saw immediate responses, and there's no way that they would have known that these questions were coming. If they're being deceptive, they might be saying to themselves, wait a minute, why did they think I was involved? What did they know? How do you know Deborah had put her in the crib?
Because of her reaction when I said she's not in there.
And any way she could climb out of that crib by herself? No.
When we got to the question, the simple question of what time did you put baby Lisa to bed that night, we could see that this question was very uncomfortable for her, and she immediately started to exhibit some evasion behavior.
Okay. I usually check up on my kids a lot at nighttime. I just didn't that night because I had been drinking, so I don't remember if I did.
In fact, it was only after our interviews and after her admissions to us that she had been intoxicated that she openly admitted this on national TV. After 9 hours of spending time with Deborah, Jeremy, we walked away thinking that it was highly unlikely that they were directly involved. If Deborah was involved in the baby's disappearance, if she's extremely intoxicated, how does she do that?
Then you have to believe a 25-year-old mother who had been drinking with 2 other children underfoot committed the perfect crime.
New witnesses then emerged that suggest there may well have been an intruder at the house that night.
I'm pretty sure that it was Lisa Irwin. I seen the man carry it.
Jeremy comes home from work and he realizes his 10-month-old daughter is missing. She is not in her crib asleep where she should be. He goes down to the bedroom and he asks his wife, where's Lisa? And then panic erupts. They realize the baby is gone.
We need her home. I can't be without her.
We're now learning that many more unusual things were happening in the neighborhood that night. New witnesses emerged that suggest there may well have been an intruder at the house. At about 12:15, the night that baby Lisa was reported missing, the neighbor who lives in this white house saw a man walking up this hill carrying a baby like this, a baby wearing only a diaper. So he calls his wife, tells her to come to the window and take a look.
He had the baby in his arms, and he had the baby's head kind of like this.
And they remember this because the baby isn't clothed right for being out in the middle of the night.
It was pretty odd, and that's why my husband kind of waited a few minutes before he actually left for work.
Her husband got into his car, and as the husband started to come up this road, they report that this man walked into this yard right here. Investigators put enough credence that a man with a baby walked through this yard that they came and took imprints of shoe marks that were left on the ground, likely that night.
About a half a mile from where that sighting was, there was an apartment complex. And the apartment complex had a large trash dumpster. And about 2:30 in the morning, the fire department was called because there had been a fire set inside this dumpster.
Initially, this dumpster fire didn't necessarily seem significant to the case. But then we learned that during an interrogation session, police showed Deborah Bradley what they said were burned pieces of baby clothing. So the question then became, was this dumpster used to destroy evidence?
At the time that the fire was set, there was a BP gas station not too far away. Video was collected from that gas station.
And there is a man walking along there around 2 in the morning. Now, it's really grainy video.
It's not clear enough to tell if there's a baby or not, but it does fit the general timeline of somebody walking from Deborah and Jeremy's house. Another witness comes forward to say he saw a man carrying a baby around 4 o'clock that morning, several miles away from the site of the house.
When I first seen him, I didn't know what he was carrying. When I got closer, I seen he was carrying a baby.
I met Mike Thompson where he says he saw this man walking with the baby. He was riding on his motorcycle.
I believe I stopped right here, and he was up here ways. And I said, "Are you all right?" He nodded his head. And he turned to look at me, and I looked at him, and I could tell he had a baby with him. She had a T-shirt and either training pants or a diaper on. I started to leave, and I told him, "You gotta get a blanket on that baby. It's too cold for her out here." I'm pretty sure that it was Lisa Irwin I seen the man carrying.
So these sightings have several things in common. The witnesses describe a baby wearing only a diaper, and they also describe a similar man, a man in his late 30s or perhaps early 40s.
The baby, after midnight in October, without even so much as a blanket, it really doesn't take a Dick Tracy to figure out what happened here.
You can draw a path from Deborah and Jeremy's to where the dumpster fire is, to the BP gas station, to the 4 o'clock sighting. Was this the person who took baby Lisa?
There's no way that's a coincidence. I absolutely, without a doubt, think that that was her and her abductor. One of the things we know is that the cell phones went missing that night.
I was told there was an attempted phone call made from one of your phones.
This seemed like the big break in the case.
That night that baby Lisa went missing, you received a phone call?
You dancing?
Dance. It's been pure hell. It's literally a nightmare. And it just seems like you just can't wake up from it. There are days where I don't want to do anything. There's days where I have to fight myself to take care of my boys in our house. Kansas City has its fair share of crime, and we have our mysteries, we have everything. But baby Lisa captivated everyone because it's a 10-month-old who's missing.
A beautiful 10-month-old baby girl who disappeared from her crib one night and has not been seen since.
One of the things we know is that the cell phones went missing that night.
The only other thing that was taken other than Lisa.
It turns out one of the stolen phones was used to call another phone that night.
We hadn't paid our bill yet. We could receive incoming calls, but not any outgoing calls. When they took Lisa and took our phones, they attempted to call someone, but I don't believe they got through. When police look at the records, there is a phone call to a woman named Megan Wright. So who is this woman, and does she have any connection to this family?
Megan Wright said repeatedly she doesn't know Deborah Bradley, she doesn't know Jeremy Irwin, she knew nothing about baby Lisa's disappearance.
But I've got absolutely nothing to hide. I've got nothing to lie about.
Megan Wright says she is completely baffled that these cell phones called her phone, that she didn't take a call. The one connection is that she is the on, off again girlfriend of John Tanko.
People know him as Jersey. He's kind of a transient type who goes throughout the neighborhood, makes a few extra bucks by doing little handy jobs for folks.
He was doing odd man jobs for an elder couple whose house was within eyesight of the Irwin home.
This is a person, though, who is in and out of trouble with the law for more than a decade.
He was someone who was under the supervision of the state at the time. He was a known burglar.
He's from New Jersey, where he was convicted twice of arson, and he was Megan Wright's boyfriend until about a week before baby Lisa disappeared.
And the reason we ended up breaking up is because he was kind of slipping back into the jailhouse mentality.
Police really went after this theory. They're even taking around a picture of him, and they're questioning neighbors. Do you know this person?
There was a man several doors down from where the Irwins lived, and when he saw the picture, he described to the police that this man had broken into his home and stayed there while his family was out on vacation or were not living in the home.
John Tanko, though, did not reappear in the neighborhood, and he was later arrested on unrelated charges elsewhere in the area.
The coincidence of him having experienced and been convicted of burglary, of arson, and we have this dumpster fire, that there's a connection between him and the cell phones is pretty compelling information.
Police have publicly said that they questioned him and they are satisfied with his answers. So Tanko was never considered a suspect. He was never arrested. He was never charged.
A few months after all this was going down, the family purported that there was a transaction on their debit or credit card that they didn't authorize.
I didn't remember buying anything online or anything of that sort, so we started looking into it.
Someone had stolen Jeremy's debit card number and used that for a $69 charge to a UK company. And that UK company turned out to be a company that you pay to give new identity to babies.
It's hard to know if that was a big, strong lead because no credit cards were taken that night.
We were able to visit that website. We verified it at the time, and then a month or so after we started looking into it, the website's just completely gone.
It can't be coincidental, but clearly shows someone was out there trying to do something sinister. He did.
Baby Lisa is one of those mysteries that just never goes away. And just when you think it dies out, something big happens in the case.
Have you heard about this? We think this might be Lisa. Everywhere we go, and I see a blue-eyed, blonde-haired little girl, I look to see if it's my daughter. Fucking. Hi.
Baby Lisa was an all-consuming story. This was the lead story. It went on for days. It stretched into weeks and months. And just when you think it dies out, something big happens in the case.
A couple now under arrest in Greece, charged with kidnapping a little girl known as Maria. Could she really be Lisa Irwin, though?
Here you have a little girl, and she's blonde, and she's in this camp. She's on the other side of the world, and authorities over there are questioning who she's with.
I see the same facial structure. I see the same eyes.
She very closely matches the height and weight, and that was really what made me start to think this might be Lisa.
It becomes incredibly heartbreaking because pretty quickly you realize the dental records don't match, and this little girl doesn't have the right eye color.
I've always felt like she's alive and she's out there.
Over the years, they do age progressions of Lisa, but the most recent one, the parents are so hopeful. This looks like what Lisa would look like. And as she gets older,
what they believe is that she could possibly solve her own case.
She's getting old enough to where most 10-year-olds are on the internet. So is it possible? Sure, I hope so.
One thing I do know is that Deborah and Jeremy had absolutely nothing to do with the disappearance of that baby, and their lives will never be the same again.
What happened to them would break a lot of people and would end relationships, but instead they've stayed together. They made the choice to stay in this house where this abduction occurred.
And when you go inside the house and you see Lisa's room, it's set up the same way as the day she vanished.
Every year since Lisa was abducted, on her birthday and Christmas, Easters, we have bought her gifts. So many of them are piled in her bedroom that we've actually run out of space.
Each year that she didn't come home, I'd buy her something bigger.
After about 7 years or so went by and she still wasn't home, we decided to start buying her jewelry.
Daughters were flowers, I'd still pick you.
And we have all of her presents and those cards and that jewelry all sitting out just waiting for her to open up when she comes home.
No matter what you believe happened in that home that night, we all know somebody got away with a crime.
My daughter, Lisa Irwin, was stolen from our home on October 3rd, 2011. If you know anyone that may be involved, please call the TIPS hotline, 816-474-TIPS. Your tip might be the tip that gets her home.
Mm.